things are changing, and yet these are still times of caution. A person recently got a vaccine, and her girlfriend said to her, "Did you have any reactions?" She said, "Oh, yes. I was overwhelmed by my sense of gratitude and amazement by human potential to create a response to something that is so encompassing." Indeed, we are witnessing the power of human potential at its best to use science to respond to what is also part of creation, the possibility of viruses running amok. In our Torah reading this morning, Vayakel Pekude, we have a focus on partnership between God and people. Some important verses. Pekude marks the completion of the building of the tabernacle. The people are still at Mount Sinai, in this place that's identified with God's presence, where God spoke to the people. God has commanded them to build a Mishkan, a tabernacle. And in Parshat Trumah, a reading of a couple weeks ago, we're told, "Va'asu li mikdash, and you shall make for me a sacred dwelling, v'shachanti bitocham, and I will dwell among you." And the rabbis point out that it doesn't say, "I will dwell in that little structure." It says, through your collective efforts of being a community focused on creating a sacred center, you will become a community in which I will dwell among you. And so this morning we're at the end of the readings of the book of Shemot. These are the last verses. And here is chapter 39, verse 32. Vatachel kol ha'avodat Mishkan ohel moed, and thus was completed all the labors of the tabernacle, the meeting of gathering. V'ya'asu b'nei Yisrael, and the children of Israel did k'chol asher tziva Adonai, according to all that God had commanded, et Moshe, Moses, Kain asu, so they did. Now you can see the emphasis here on this word, Kain asu, and the context of Bnei Yisrael. The rabbis will emphasize that all of Israel collectively were focused on the same goal, collectively enabled the fulfillment of what God had directed. Kain asu, so they did it. Already Moshe Alshich, a commentator of Turkey of the 16th century, points to a tension in that verse. He says, "Vatachel kol havodat mishkan ohel moed," and all the work of the tabernacle was completed. And then it says, "And Israel did all that they were commanded." He says it should be the opposite, right? Israel did everything they were commanded to do, and therefore all was completed. My teacher, Abraham Twersky, building on a midrash, comments in regard to the question of Moshe Alshich, and he says, the midrash is that the people did not complete the work themselves, that it was God distinctly who allowed the miracle of all the parts to come together. But it was only a result of what the people had done that God could then complete the effort. That it was precisely because the people were responding to God's will that God partnered. And Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky points out that when we have good things in our life, we must always know that there's an element of mystery, of even miracle, and things coming together. He points out that parents can use best practices in raising a child. Abraham and Sarah also had a Yishmael, and Isaac also had an Esav with Rebekah. which is to say that there are things that are often beyond our control. We can use best efforts, and sometimes indeed we are rewarded, and sometimes it goes awry. And so in this moment of the completion of the tabernacle, there's a sense of hard effort, collective effort, response, and yet a sense of gratitude to the mystery of when it all comes together. And so, as that chapter continues, listen for these words that sound like creation. Now, verse 32. K'chol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe, and all which the ever-present one had commanded Moses, Kain asu, so they did, B'nai Yisrael. This is another verse, the children of Israel, et kol ha'avodah, all the labors. And here's the echo of the creation story, chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. V'yar Moshe et kol hamlacha. And Moses surveyed. He looked at all the creative efforts. That's what it says, Vaychulu, right? V'yar Elohim, and God looked. V'hinei asu ota kasher tziva Adonai. And they, behold, had done all that had been commanded, Kain asu. So they did. Vayvarech otam Moshe. Vaychulu hashamayim, vayar. And it was completed, it was looked at, it was blessed. And the rabbis point out that in this moment, it is as if we are creators. It is as if we are mirroring the divine's capacity to create an ordered world. In the fulfillment of the command to build this community by working together, we as people have the capacity to indeed be B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And so today we gather. I would assume most, if not all of us, have at least one, if not two vaccines in our arm. Wow. Wow is the expression when one encounters holiness. Wow. The human capacity to use our intellect to respond to what is also part of our world, a creation that is anomalies. I was reading this morning about some of those anomalies. There are two variants in Brazil. The first one was more widespread, but now there's a new one identified with the city of Manaus in the Amazon called the P1. This one seems to be the most virulent yet. Hasn't quite spread. One thing we've learned from this experience of a year with COVID is that something that starts in one place can spread. The fact that there is a variant in Manaus is reason for concern. We cannot believe that because we've had a vaccine, we're safe. Sadly, it's not that simple. Variants, mutations will continue, and they will continue as long as there is a problem with the coronavirus. This last week, I had the privilege to interview Etgar Keret. Etgar Keret said that the nature of COVID is that it attacks the weakest parts of the body. So if you have problems with your lungs, it's breathing that will be impacted. If you have problems in your spine, that is vulnerable. That's part of the insidious nature of the virus. It seeks and finds the weakest parts of a body, and that's where it embeds. But he said, the same thing is true of COVID in terms of this last year revealing what is weakest in our larger collective. It is in this time that we are aware of disparities between haves and have-nots who have access to the vaccine. In Africa, for instance, there is hardly any vaccine to this point that has been distributed. It is a poorer continent. But know that if a variation occurs in Africa, whether South Africa or other parts in this coming year, we are all interconnected. If anything, what we have learned this year is exactly that. We are interconnected, and a vulnerability there is a vulnerability here. We are all cells of a larger Gaia, of a larger body. And so we look forward with hope. Today we celebrate. We're gathered together with Pesach before us. When was that tabernacle set up? About 3,200 years ago tomorrow. In a moment, Amy Robinson-Katz is going to chant the blessing for the new moon of Nisan. When is the tabernacle set up? The 1st of Nisan. This Shabbat is called Shabbat HaChodesh because it's the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And chapter 12, Exodus, the first commandment given to the Israelites. V'yomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aaron Eretz Mitzrayim lemor. And God said to Moses and to Aaron, still in the land of Egypt, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lachem, this shall be for you the month. Rosh Chodeshim, the head of all months. Rishon hu lachem lechadshei hashanah. It shall be first to you among all months of the year. This is the first command as a people. The rabbis say that before the Israelites went into freedom, God set the calendar. What is the first command for the Israelites? It's to create a calendar as a community, to be on the same rhythm that you will create. You will have the authority. I give over my power. The Hasidic story is told of a rabbi with a beautiful watch. And when his son has it as bar mitzvah, he took off his watch and he gave it to his son. And he says, now you're going to keep time for yourself. And so, tomorrow, we start counting to Passover. Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, the 1st of Nisan, tonight and tomorrow. And Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the inauguration date of setting up of the Mishkan. Whether the calendar or the Mishkan, we are reminded of responsibilities to know and act on behalf of collective. We are reminded of our power as people to partner with God. We know of our enormous power, the ability to affect change in calculating time and responding collectively to crisis. My teacher, my friend, Rabbi Michael Beals, is with us this morning, just a couple days after his birthday. We'll all wish him a happy birthday after. And as my friend, Rabbi Beals, says, for us as we are here wearing masks, even though we may have been vaccinated, for us as a nation to extend resources beyond our borders of vaccines to help others, that is what it means to be patriotic. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, we have enormous potential, we have enormous power, the ability to affect change, and yet we are humbled to know we are also vulnerable. May we use our capacity not only of intellect to create a virus, but a heart to be open to unite, to respond collectively, so that we too may feel that this task is completed, that we can see a new dawn, and that we can so feel blessed by you, our Creator. Amen.